Thank you. Let me welcome the entire team from Parliament and the Senate, our members of the upper house, and of course the members from the main agencies this evening, JSif, JSif, and of course our usual friends from CPC, AG. Welcome. And Minister Chuck, nobody from the Ministry of Justice?
Everybody is here from the Ministry of Justice. We have CPC.
No, CPC is mine. We don't call it.
What do you mean? And we have the Attorney General.
Myself and the AG and the CPC. You see? No, that is, those are not yours. Your the AG is my double time. You have no stake in the AG at all, the Minister of Justice. You just respond to make sure she's kept safe and well looked after. All right. Welcome everyone. This is the first sitting of the second sitting really, of our Joint Select Committee to review the law reform zones of special operation, special security and community development measures act. As we discussed last week, this is third day of operation. We need to look at it and see how it operated and examine all features, see if it is fulfilling its role, and where we need to make changes, we do our and keep it going. It's a very critical part of the government's policy of clear, hold and build in the difficult communities. This evening we'll be hearing from a number of the principal actors in executing the program. Jamaica Social Investment Fund, the JSif, and the Jamaica Defense Force. JDF gave us a very detailed operational review, so we're going to do it in camera as the last item on the agenda. We should be able to get through these items fairly quickly, although they are of profound importance. Any questions before we invite the Jamaica Social Investment Fund to make its presentation? Oh, sorry, the minutes. Eh? You don't have it. Eh? No? Now before we go, can someone move for the confirmation of minutes of the last meeting? Hmm? Yeah. Thank you, Minister. Seconded?
All right.
Okay. Any matter arising from this zone? Any? No. It's all procedural. But the public notes wasn't done, but it's back on the agenda too. It wasn't done, right? Oh, okay. Yes, sorry. The public notice was sent out without any date, so we'll have to repeat that in January. We'll give a specific date for them to come in. All right.
Yeah. Well, do we have an indication from the messages, the notices that were sent out of people who are desirous of making representation?
Yeah, the only response we've had is from the DPP, and they have no interest at this point.
Who?
DPP. So we'll send in another one out. Individuals from the community. Right. Any apologies? Oh, no. We'll proceed then to the substance of this evening meeting and invite the Jamaica Social Investment Fund to begin their presentation. think you can remove the mask. We are a little bit.
And pull the mic a little closer, please, Chair.
Or some of the intelligence or some of the design parameters that go into these social interventions. Because what happens typically, by the time our report gets rolled up and come to Parliament, what you're really just seeing is a description and a number. And so this afternoon I'm supported by our Social Development Manager, Mrs. Mona Suho. She works a lot in the communities and in designing the interventions, and also Mr. Dane McLean. And if the committee will allow, I will ask Mona to go through the presentation and present some aspects of the design and the approach that we've been going through on the Social Intervention Committee with alacrity, so that we could take the time to field questions and provide clarity where needed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sweeney. It's not moving at all. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mr. Sweeney, again. And I'm extremely honored to be here. So very quickly, the structure of the presentation is really to highlight the results and impact of the interventions in the four ZOSOs, Mount Salem, Denham Town, Greenwich Town, and August Town. And it will cover the period September 2017 to December 2020, as well as it will be divided into the four main sections. I'll start out by giving a background and then move into the social intervention methodology. And then we'll look at the meat of the matter, which is really the report on the key results and impact under three areas: safer spaces, human capacity development and governance, and then to close looking at the challenges and recommendations. The zoologic model is really quite interesting, as it states that if we combined enhanced security operations with social interventions, and that is basically underpinned by a very robust legal framework, then we can have an improvement in security and in the quality of life of residents in the ZOSO. So that is really the logic that we are working with. The framework of the interventions is really looking at three key results areas: safer spaces, human capacity development, and governance and coordination. And the whole idea is that if we invest in these three key areas, then the outcome would be within these zones an improvement in security, in the security environment, as well as in the quality of life of residents. And so the outcome is really twofold. It's not only just an increase in security, but overall an increase in the quality of life of residents and community building. And that is important to note. The theory of change, we have to work based on sound empirical evidence and sound theories. And so the theory of change is put forth there. And essentially, if it assumes that crime is really preventable, and it is really due to the result of numerous context-based situational and social risk factors. public safety here is defined not only as a matter of non-victimization from crime and violence, but also perception of safety. And also we have very strong evidence as to what works, both in the national context as well as from international best practice. And so we conclude that volatile communities can become safer by utilizing integrated approaches that combine enhanced security measures and criminal justice with social interventions and that are sustained and reinforced by the stewardship of key community stakeholders and groups. Looking at the first key result, which is safer spaces, I'm frequently asked the question, why are we investing in safer spaces? Why are we investing in infrastructure to support safer spaces? And that's because the outcome is that we really want to have residents live in and utilize spaces which are less prone to violence. And in that, we invested in 5 key areas: zinc fence removal and substitution, road rehabilitation, which looks at not only just the roads being fixed, but also things like water mains and the sidewalks and stormwater infrastructure, the rehabilitation and creation of recreational and green spaces, ensuring that we have proper streetlight infrastructure and households are regularized, as well as the solid waste management component. So these are the 5 key activities that we conducted under the safer spaces component. In terms of zinc fence removal, why should we invest in zinc fence removal? The existence of these zinc fences really impede the line of sight from inside the dwellings and outside the homes and impact on surveillance. They prevent effective surveillance by the security forces and the apprehension of perpetrators. They are a safety hazard. They are not appealing in terms of aesthetics, and of course, there is a strong stigma attached to these zinc fences within spaces because they're normally associated with shanty towns, etc. Poor road conditions also of concern because they impede the movement of security vehicles and personnel. Barriers in the roadway prevent access by service providers and security forces, and of course it impedes the mobility of residents. Having done the zinc fence removal projects in 3 of the 4 ZOSOs, we have done our investigations. We had an independent consultant do work in terms of looking at the impact, and the overall result is that from the zinc fence removal projects, there is an improvement in the security environment due to increased access by vehicles and security personnel. There's improved surveillance of the environment by both residents and security personnel. And residents overall reported an improved perception of safety as well as improved perception of self and community due to the stigma associated with the presence of zinc fences and them now being removed. In terms of the road rehabilitation, we had very strong feedback by both the security forces as well as the residents. On the security side, they report an improvement in preventative and routine incidents patrols, as well as response times to emergencies. Secondly, it significantly impacted security operations due to its effect on improving security responses, both vehicular and patrols. Cannot underestimate the importance of providing green spaces and parks. You'll see there an example from Denham Town where the parks were rehabilitated and the signs were included, entry signs, as well as a number of green spaces were established. These investments provided safer spaces for socializing and recreational activities, certainly provided short-term employment for a number of residents, improvement in the community aesthetics, improvement in community pride, as well as for the general investments. The success of these initiatives allowed us to leverage support for other projects and for community building. The solid waste management component, you might ask, why is it being included under safer spaces? And there is evidence to support the fact that solid waste management can impact on safety in terms of the fact that in many cases, large obstacles are sometimes used to block roadways and prevent access by the security forces and service providers. So under this project, we did a lot of work to install skips, recycling bins, garbage bins, and enclosures, focused largely on Denham Town and Greenwich Town, and as well as trying our best to work with the MOHW in terms of their eradication programs for dengue. We have seen over 50% improvement in solid waste collection by the NSWMA, as well as the MOHW reported that the ADs index has decreased as a result of solid waste activities. There's also improvement in the cleanliness and community aesthetics, as well as improved health and well-being of the residents, and of course an increase in their community pride. We did a survey in Barrytown and in collaboration with the University of the West Indies, and the survey concluded that both the road rehabilitation and the zinc fence removal combined impacted positively on the perception of safety, of self, of community, as well as community-police relationships. In addition, when we are looking at the investments in the road infrastructure, we have to also realize that roads can have a useful life, or we call a benefit period of up to 30 years in some cases, and so that benefit period has to be taken in consideration when we are evaluating the results of the road investment, as well as other impacts such as savings in travel time costs, vehicle operating costs, and of course the maintenance costs of the roads. And you'll see on the slide there, it's a summary of what I just said. Over 19,900 residents were impacted by interventions under the Safer Spaces component and in the 5 key areas that I mentioned earlier: road rehab, the zinc fence removal, the street lighting, the parks and green spaces, as well as the solid waste. In terms of the human capacity development, why would we want to invest? Essentially, we want to build the community stake and ownership of security efforts, as well as we want to improve on and build on the capacity of persons through certification and skills training to be able to contribute towards society. And essentially, that is the reason why we're investing in human capacity. In this era, we focus on 8 key nodes. We worked very heavily with HOPE and HEART, NTA, in terms of the youth workforce projects. The SDC and the JSif, CSSB worked very heavily on the component of building the capacity of the CBOs. We had we looked at short-term employment linked to infrastructure works and environmental wardens program that was supported very heavily by the NSWMA. The provision of civil documents by the RGD, the provision of social protection benefits, health and educational services, parenting support services. Of course, at the time, the PMI did a lot of case management work with ex-offenders and other high-risk youth, as well as connection to social services. And there you see just some highlights from media clips. The JSif providing $4 million for the police youth clubs, and to the right, HEART, NTA, and HOPE there at one of their trade events. Across the board in the ZOSOs, a lot of work was done. Those photographs speak to the JSif doing work with with persons who are out of school due to COVID-19 in March. But of course, the MOEYI played a very, very important role and lead the sector in terms of providing education for at-risk for persons who were impacted by the COVID-19 situation and could not report to school. There you will see us providing supplies to the JSif to support their numerous outreach programs, and of course the CSSB as well. You would have had summer interventions that reached out to both children and youth. And of course, there is a recent photograph of the homework program that is being done at the Denham Town station with the youth club there. So what exactly is the impact of the human capacity building activities? We have 550 persons were engaged in youth workforce initiatives delivered in collaboration with HEART, NTA, HOPE, and the private sector. The completion rates were quite impressive, 88%. Certification rates were 70%, as well as employment rates were 39%, which is still above the national average. In terms of the birth certificate program or the provision of civil documents, we also did a survey because we always want to ensure that we evaluate our programs and that we document the lessons learned. And over half of the persons who were surveyed reported that they would not be able to access a birth certificate without the project that was implemented. For quite a few of the persons, 93% of the persons, this was the first time that they were actually receiving a birth certificate. And how did they use these birth certificates? They used it to connect to services such as education, social protection, the PATH program registration, NHF benefits, banking and financial services, and also to be the basis for getting other forms of IDs such as their passports, etc. Summary very quickly of the human capacity development in terms of the various communities, the investment, and of course as well to over 1,000 direct beneficiaries from that component. In terms of governance, this is a very, very key area to look at as well too, as the interventions in the zone are implemented under the guidance of what is called the Social Intervention Committee. And this SIC is guided by a framework that have been approved by Cabinet, and it has 6 main pillars. And so we have, in each of the 4 ZOSOs, we have subcommittees looking at, for example, the physical environment, land tenure regularization, community safety, human and community development, business and economic development, and of course, faith-based and leadership. What were the results in terms of the governance? To date, 4 SICs or committees were established, and they're all functional with relevant subcommittees. There is also a secretariat that was established at the JSif to provide admin support to the SIC. 100% of scheduled reports were submitted to answer during the reporting period, and at least 2 meetings of SICs are held annually, either the subcommittee or the general committee meetings. Effective coordination of the MDAs and stakeholders to support service delivery, valuing over $1 billion during the reporting period. As an example there's a police to your right, the Solid Waste Management Authority, moving from right to left. There are a number of our stakeholders who are there in our stakeholder meetings in March 2020. Difficult slide to see, but it's very important to realize that the work in all the 4 ZOSOs could not have taken place without the input of several partners. And that matrix there would show you how some of the various sectors and the input from various stakeholders, including the NSWME, NWA, across the board, And it's very, very important to understand that it really represents an integrated approach to development with the contribution of a number of MDAs as well as non-MDA stakeholders. Challenges that we have faced. We were impacted by the participation levels. Ideally, we would want to have a quorum of at least half of the membership, but in many cases, in one particular case, we did not. And so the SIC in Denham Town are really at below acceptable levels. And recently in December, the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister had a meeting with the team to discuss the way forward as it relates to the Denham Town SIC. The fiscal space allocation remains a constraint as persons report on not being able to fulfill their work and activities due to the lack of fiscal space. And lastly, having a very comprehensive database to guide planning and programming. Recommendations to move forward, just 6 key recommendations. To strengthen accountability mechanisms to guarantee participation of MDAs on the SIC. To include the budget to support monitoring and evaluation. This will support more robust evaluation of results. And to ensure that the design of interventions really support activities and services to the highest risk segments of the population. And these may require case management services. Enforce code of conduct to govern the conduct of security forces. That we continue to implement approaches which are integrated, focus heavily on transforming the physical environment, but also delivering social services. And that has proven to be the most effective approach to crime reduction within these zones. And then, of course, too, that when we're thinking about community building and community transformation, we also look at the long-term issue of housing and land tenure. That's just a list there of upcoming activities in 2021. We have a very solid program of work scheduled for 2021 that includes as well to rehabilitation of the Denham Town Police Station as well as the construction of the Mount Salem Police Station and a number of roads and zinc fences across the ZOSOs. Also, as well, we have programmed investments in terms of human capacity development, working with the National Parenting Support Commission and a number of other agencies, hard hope to deliver the skills training and certification services. And of course, to continue with the whole issue of having a strong governance framework to guide the programming of works, and to the CSP Secretariat is now in place. And of course, we want to ensure that we have all of the SIC still being very active and that we continue to do the work that we have programmed to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, JSif, Ms. Sohiu. We'll take the question as comment. The JSif has been doing this kind of work for some time and doing in their specialized areas some very excellent work. But looking at your introduction, you're operating off 2 theories. One, crime prevention of environmental design. I think your work in that area is exceptional. But the second phase, crime prevention of social development, where you refer to human development, is, well, from my perspective, is extremely what I'd call development light. And what I'd have loved to hear from you is your own perspective on that area, how you think we should move forward there. Because you have to, in human development, expect to leave something that is sustainable. What you have given is a review of what you have done. And that's what I'm looking for. And Denham Town may be a good example because it's big enough. And you can see 18, 19, we had significant reduction in crime because the object of shifting from ICBSP, which was the Industry-Based Services, which is a very good program, to ZOSO is to get crime reduction. Industry-Based Services was more environmental and general development. This has a direct impact on development to achieve social change. And we see Denhamtown in 2020 going backwards because essentially the third generation youngsters are coming alive and taking a position in crime, which means we have not achieved the human development that index we require. And I'd love to have seen some comment from that side of JSif, the individuals who are involved in the human resource development side, why we have not seen any change there. I said essentially the third generation are just showing they're going to replace this, so the moment you move, you will have the problem again. And after 3 years, we should have an exit strategy. What will target? ZOSO is not a lifetime activity. The idea is to move through all the communities and leave them in a better state, that they become normal communities within a measurable time frame. That's a little bit longer. The third comment I'm considering, I don't see enough socio-demographic data. But that's what will tell you when you can exit. It's a critique of, I don't see enough socio-demographic data. That is a critique of all social intervention in Jamaica over the years. Clearly stated by the research from Capri, but I have noted before, what are the factors in human development they identify and how we're going to change them and leave a structure in place to maintain the change, and that deals with maternal and child health, employment levels, skill levels, including literacy and numeracy, the character of schools. I don't see enough of that there to give us a pathway to exit. It's fine that you engage 450 people in Heart Trust for certification, but the chances are, if you leave the school as it was, 5 years' time I have to see another 450. And that's really my challenge on the human development side. And I don't see any indication here that they are looking at that to provide me with a path out of that. And if I need to change the law or the policy, because we're looking at the law here. Sorry, Mr. Sweeney, a bit.
Thank you, Chairman, Minister. You raise an important point about the human development side. And if you note on the slide in the presentation where we spoke about the completion rates, the certification rates, as well as the employment rates, our data shows that the programs we're currently implementing are above the national, our results are above the national average. No. What I'll say to you is that the cost per individual that we have to outlay to achieve these types of results are really beyond what is also being spent nationally. To give an example, to get someone engaged, trained, and employed in a meaningful occupation, I would say, is costing us well in excess of $300,000 per individual, right? Now, what that means is that if you were to scale that to the numbers that we have out there, it would be an incredible budget. And I think the point I'm making is that if we're going to make inroads going forward, we're going to have to look at doubling or maybe tripling what we're spending on human capacity development. A lot of the things that we're doing is remedial, simply because the young persons are coming out of secondary school system without the necessary skills. And so what we're finding is that we have to be investing . You have it? Yes. Okay, great. Right. Thanks. So we have to be investing. We have to be investing significantly more, and we have to look at a program that will invest significantly more at the secondary and at the skills or tertiary level than we're doing right now. If you compare in our presentation the kind of money that has been spent on physical infrastructure versus the human capacity, development, you'll see that there's a big divide in terms of what's spent. Now it is true that the condition of the infrastructure in these communities is woefully inadequate, right? And from a security standpoint, we do have to address what we are calling CEPTED, or the crime prevention through environmental design. We have to address that first. But once we have addressed that, the individual, whether secondary or youth, we also have to look more on the type of resources and the type of institutions that are around to engage those youths. And I think that our challenge right now has been on the budgetary side, because while we find our programs are effective, the numbers are not large enough for you to see the sort of impact you're looking for.
I hear you loud and clear, but I'd also like to go ahead and do we spend more money on engaging more of the young people who are there between 18 and 25, which we should be able to do, really, or do we spend more money now doing what we are doing at 450 and begin to ensure that the schools perform at the level that they should perform? I mean, your impression was there. In other words, when they leave school, they leave with a skill. For those who are coming, you spend 5 years in there. I'd hope at the end of 5 years, the school you don't need to go back in there for some more, because the schools are now producing literate, functionally skilled people. So how do we spend the money if we're $1?
Chairman, just before I raise some questions I just want a clarification from Mr. Sweeney of what he just said. 550 persons were engaged in youth workforce initiative, and you're saying that's an average of 300,000 per individual. Did I get that correctly?
I'm saying that when the numbers are not represented here. I'm speaking when JSif designs a program, for example, to engage 550 youth in a training program, for us to deal with the deportment and some of the life issues, to allow them to matriculate successfully through the program, it will cost you on an average about 300,000 per individual.
Which would be 165 million. Was that spent in this program?
We had the numbers here. I think the numbers that we've spent so far.
I just multiply 550 by 300,000.
Right.
And it came to 165 million. And I was trying to find out if that was spent in this program.
The numbers are consolidated between JSif resources and Heart Trust resources, so I haven't consolidated it totally. In terms of that, I'm speaking to you from the point of view of what we know it costs to train a person.
And your cost could be different from the Heart Trust cost?
Yes, it would be.
300 is to you?
Yes.
So we're talking about more than the 165 million. And I'm just trying to get a sense if in this educational initiative, this workforce initiative, whether we did spend, well, JSif at least, spend out 165 million.
The cost that Heart would pick up for if you want to say.
No, not forget Heart, Chairman. Just JSif.
Right.
Did you spend 165 million?
We didn't spend 165 million on the 550. No.
You did?
No, we did not.
You didn't, I see.
Because Heart would have subsidized some of this in terms of the training.
But my understanding from what you said is that Heart spend is different from the JSif spend.
Yes.
That's my understanding, and he's confirmed it. Further, you're saying to us that for your spend, JSif, it would be about 300,000 per individual. I just following the matter.
Correct. And if we have to pay Heart, in other words, Heart is an executive agency, we would have to give them some recompense.
So you're saying you pay Heart out of this 165?
Out of the 165 million?
A million, yeah.
We would pay Heart if that was the case.
Sorry?
If that was the case, we would pay Heart.
But your spend on the workforce is not reflected in this report to us.
Not our entire spend, no.
I see spend on safer space,
Right.
which comes to about $800 million for 3 of the zones, right? But I'm not seeing any spend on this. Sorry? Yeah, and so I want to, because we have to look at Zozo in its entirety, in the round, so I want to get a sense of what the spend has been including that. So if you could give us an update on that. Chair, I have some other question, but I'm clear other committee members have
We can consolidate the numbers.
I just wanted clarification on that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Permit me to begin my intervention by expressing a commendation to Mr. Sweeney and his team. Having worked very closely with the JSif, and in particular with Mr. Sweeney, I know that he tries. I find his very responsive manner, his willingness to listen and to take suggestion to be quite commendable and encouraging.
Thank you.
Having said that, Chairman, I wonder if it may be useful for us to look at the community development paradigm that is being used and to just interrogate it a little more. Chairman, I share your opening comments in respect of a requirement for deeper perspective on community development and the paucity of information in respect of an exit path. Two things I want to highlight on that side and would invite the JSif's comment is whether you find an overdependence in the zone on the projects and a slowness in the community to take responsibility for the space, a sense that should the zones be discontinued, that things may revert in the direction that we're moving away from. I don't know how much of that observation you share, but as I go across the Mount Salem ZOSO, the comments are that persons do not want the zone to go, almost as if the expectation and the desire is for it to be in a permanent state. Also want to find out, I don't know if it is just about the money, to pick up on your side comment, Member Chuck. Perhaps it is, but it is worth interrogating. Right, but one of the other things, as you highlighted, Mr. Sweeney, that the JSif has ensured that through the Prime Minister, the reports have been in Parliament, and that's quite commendable because all the reports have come and they have come in on time with very useful information. One of the things I noted, though, in the debates in the House on the extension motions is whether the state agencies who are tasked in law to provide the services have been doing so, and whether it required a ZOSO for those services to be provided to individuals. Secondly, has the state come back sufficiently in the space, and the other players of the state, are they seized of the urgency of ensuring that the void that has existed for a long time, which has contributed to the many other factors, including the high level of crime and violence, the critical importance of being back in that space? Because you know, general comments and general observation is just the absence of the agents of the state in communities, and so there is a disconnect between citizens and a disservice to citizens in critical areas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Member Paul, wait for you. What's that?
Yeah, perhaps he could address.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Sweeney.
My own.
Thank you. There is no question that the absence of the state in the communities and the establishment of the ZOSOs and the attention that the state would provide to these zones created a new experience for the residents. And so the residents have responded positively to say that if this is what ZOSO means, then we want ZOSO. I mean, your security forces are present, your garbage collection is happening, services are being offered. And so we work first to reestablish community leadership. Mona spoke about the police youth clubs, for example. and other curfew monitors and groups that are in the community. And the idea of that is to have community groups be strong so that when state services, I don't want to say retreat, but or at least return to normal, these persons will be able to continue to carry out their works. Now, if I give an example in Mount Salem, I'd say to you that before the ZOSO in Mount Salem, garbage collection was a significant problem. And when the ZOSO occurred, we put infrastructure in place, we did community cleanups, and beyond that, we created a relationship between the leadership in the community of Mount Salem and the National Solid Waste Management Authority. And so, with those relationships being built, if garbage collection once again becomes a problem, they would have the ability now to make their own contact. They don't have to call Omar Sweeney to ask Omar Sweeney to call NSWMA. They can make their own contact and deal with their garbage collection. Now, these things take time and years to sustain, that's one. But the second thing is, what happens in many of these communities, which is a significant risk, is migration. I mean, persons who have the best ability, the most ability in many of these communities, also tend to move on to better opportunities. And so having a sort of situation where when trained persons, when leaders leave, what is a succession that would allow the community to continue to be strong? That's a point. And the second thing is, and coming to your point, agencies will not be able to sustainably focus on any one particular community for a long period of time, like the NWA or JPS or anybody else. So it is important that when we go in with these types of interventions, we really leave them in a way that it's, if you will, low maintenance, right? So you do have to invest sometimes in a way that ensures that 25 to 30 years they should have a good road surface, granted someone doesn't damage it. And so at this point in time, I think the lesson that we all have to learn is that, one, when we get there, the state is absent, and two, after we leave there, we have to leave sufficient footprint of the state balanced with community groups that can manage their own reality.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and I'm sorry I wasn't here at our first meeting, but okay. I wanted to, in pursuing this issue, recognize that this law probably is the first of its kind that almost enshrined social intervention as a major aspect of crime fighting in Jamaica. Certainly, it provides tremendous emphasis in it. And there are many persons like myself who believe that long-term, this is the way to bring social order to Jamaica. So the work of your organization and others is quite crucial. And I would love, Mr. Chairman, if we can, in this period of assessing ZOSO, if there can be some qualitative analysis done. Yes, we have the coercive element by the state. We have the social dimension. And that social dimension, as I mentioned before, is going to be crucial. And for you to do the qualitative analysis, you have to look at the operations of the ZOSOs in these areas to see what has happened with crime, how the social intervention has affected health, and for us to map it properly to enable us to look, for example, at the spend and whether or not we are in fact achieving success based on the investment, whether we should be shifting investment from one element of crime fighting to another, which is social intervention. And I would also like to ask, in relation to the various bodies that are involved in social intervention, how do you coordinate? What's the working relationship? There are myriads of agencies in the state. You also have, or had, I'm not too sure where they are now, the PMI, which performed a tremendous role in communities that also assist in crime fighting. What is the relationship? And, Chairman, how we can embrace them and others as part of this collaborative effort to use social intervention to minimize the impact of crime and violence in our society.
Respond, you want to?
Chairman, I was struck by your observation about what actually the remedial work which has to be done, your observation as to whether or not one should be dealing with the school system, something of that nature you said. And what it points to is a need for an evaluation as to what is a best spend to achieve what we are trying to achieve. And so what I want to ask you, Mr. Sweeney, is what are the targets you have? Or do you have targets that will guide you, that once you achieve that, you know that you can end the Zozo, and that the community can function on its own? Or is it that the only way to deal with these troubled communities is to have a permanent Zozo? In other words, this is specific legislation which has specific purpose and targets. What I'm hearing you say when reading from the report is what I expect to happen in a community. It's not something extraordinary that we are embarking on. The training, the certification, the births. It's absolute normal. This is what we expect. And so my concern, and what is disturbing to me, is this going to be not a 60-day, not a renewal time, but is this going to be that Zozo is going to become entrenched and normalized in communities? Because if we don't have a time when we can say we have to stop coming back to Parliament for an extension, then it makes a mockery of what we're doing here. Take, for example, Mount Salem, 2017, September 17, 2017. This is 2021. So at what stage then? What is your target? What is your evaluation? How are we going to determine whether we are doing the best thing and we are getting the best spend? Because it is a significant investment that we have embarked upon when we quantify the number of persons and how much it is costing us to spend on each individual. I wonder if you could, in responding to Member Paulwell, embrace my question.
Thank you. Mr. Sweeney, before you answer, it goes back to what I asked at the beginning of the day. We need, if we're going to quantitative analysis, we need the quantity at the beginning. And all the sociographic data I refer to, we need them at the beginning so we can see where we're going and when we withdraw. And I raise it with you, Mr. JSif, because in fairness, JSif started more on the physical side. That's your down, and I think you need to explain to members here. JSif was brought to the environment, the road, the titling, the water, and all those. And then, so this, as I said, and it comes across to you in this, the social intervention is almost an adjunct to what you're doing. And I really want to get your comments on the experience, because you have done, as I said, it's like an enhanced inner city basic service project. You're fixing all the environmental issues, garbage collection, environmental wardens, but the real social, the core social problems that affect behavior is not being addressed here, and don't have the data to deal with it. And that's why I was hoping you'd start trying to answer the question directly, but also give me a comment on your views as the professionals in JSif who have been observing it, because you have been to several communities where you have done similar work, and we have the human challenge behind. In fact, Montego Bay is a good example in that Mount Salem, you are doing the work now, but you have done inner city basic services work in Flanker for the last 20 years. And you're at a point where you're almost exiting. Once you finish the clinic and the school thing, the physical part of your work in Flanker is finished. But I still have problems on the human side. And that experience could be useful in advising what changes I need to make in the legislation. That's what we're here for. That's a review of your successful work, to make sure that we adopt a program that will give us an exit to normalcy in the community. That is really the sum, and that's why the quantitative and from member Paul and Senator Scott, I think, is important in dealing with it, is to look how can JSif advise us to make amendments to policy and legislation to ensure that we can have an exit strategy. It will cost money, and depending on the amount of money, the time will vary, but can we design a program for 5 years and say it costs that? If we have to adjust the budget, then we say, well, we have to go for 7 years, or we fast forward to 3 years. But I need to see that kind of numbers before we can really, to go forward.
And to be frank, Member Paulwell, and in particular, Member Scott Motley, captures the essence of my concern. Start at the end. What is the exit strategy? Because Zozo, as all of us understand it, is an intervention. It is not a program that you institute for infinite period of time. It's an intervention to deal with some abnormalities that exist, the levels of crime, social behavior, the rest of it that exists in those communities. So you intervene to fix those or to put them on a path that normalcy will prevail. So in summary, is Zozo operating with any exit strategy? You're going to do A, B, D, C things, and as Member Paulwell said, what are those measurable? And we raised it in the House debate a number of times, Minister. What is it that determines when it's time to leave? Or you just, because the case of Mount Salem, 3.5 years. Is it they're going to be there for another 3.5 years? What will determine if it's 6 months more you need, or 3 months more, or 1 year, or 10 years' time? So we can plan for it. So tell us that. And secondly, I would, as part of the exit strategy, I would expect that certain critical agencies would be engaged. Take, for example, SDC, that has a permanent community engagement function, unlike JSif. JSif goes into communities across the country over the years and execute certain projects, and they're gone. You're like a contractor. You come and build some houses or build a road, and you're gone. All of us as MPs have the experience, most of us as MPs have experience with JSif. You're gone. What is the institutional arrangements being set up in these communities that can transform it while you are there and after you're gone? I don't hear any mention. For example, what are the linkages established with the JSif and other community groups over and beyond what the JSif normally do? For example, JSif have community involvement programs right across the country. It's not new for the JSif. What special arrangements this intervention by Zozo, by JSif through Zozo provides for? So it seems to be just meandering along and with no end in sight. And lastly, what are those qualitative and quantitative measurements that we can look at and say, yes, it is successful, or we need to do more?
Thank you. Chairman, you in your remarks, you said, you asked, what is our opinion after so many years of doing this work? I will tell you, and coincidentally enough, today marks 18 years since I walked into JSif. And since that time, I will tell you that vulnerable communities need support. Vulnerable communities need support. There's a reason why Hunts Bay and Mountain View and the strip from Majestic Gardens to downtown require a different level of resources for policing than, say, Barbican. There's a reason, right? Because vulnerable communities need a different level of support. And I think as a government that if we continue to look for a panacea or a magic bullet that's just going to go into these communities and apply a set of targets or a set of interventions and walk away and all will be well, that's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen because there's a myriad of other issues that are abstract to what we're doing that lead to the problems that we have. And so it has always been my view that, and we, as you mentioned before, when we did ICBSP, Inner City Basic Services Project, we knew we had to take on 12 communities at a time. When we did ICDP, we knew we had to take on 18 communities in 7 parishes at a time, simply because you can have this balloon effect where you apply a set of interventions here and then a set of problems start to happen over there. And I think what the government should look at is a long-term strategy so that you don't have to wonder if ZOSA is meandering along or why is it 3 years. You need a long-term, a 10-year, a 20-year strategy that says, okay, we're going to invest. If the budget is $800 billion, we're going to invest $3 billion a year in 20 communities or 30 communities for the next 20 years. That's what has to happen.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. We have member Ford coming back in, but the source of sanity, like I will take the full debate today, and why I ask you to give an opinion, because remember, the government itself has already recognized that the social services side has not been functioning effectively in these areas. Not in terms of prior to ZOSO, and even ZOSO now, which is why we have brought in the city security program, and Secretary was supposed to focus on the social side as opposed to JSif focusing on the physical side. The challenge we face in this committee is we have to look whether we need to strengthen the law to get that aspect of it, and at some point we'll have to have a presentation from CSP, because the social, I don't like to use the word, the social services to these people, to the citizens in the troubled communities, cannot be an intervention. It has to be a long-term impact. That has to be there, because when you finish the environmental problem, you need to move on. It's not a matter of meandering. That's the purpose of JSif, is to get in there, fix the environmental issues and some basic environmental issues, road, light, water, etc. And while you're there, you win some credits for working with them in a social way, but we need to ensure that the social services that these people are denied for years, that's why they're deteriorating. The schools are bad. When they go down to South St. Andrew, none of the students you meet in the primary school want to go to Haile Selassie. And that's been going on for 40 years. We build a school and leave it down there, and all the bright students come to Jamaica College, Excelsior College, and eventually leave what's left for the student there. We treat them like what's left rather than provide a program that will really raise them and get them out of that syndrome of poverty. The health clinic is in a mess. Interestingly, Mr. Sweeney, when we decided to pay some attention to Denham Town, your team was there. We find 46 checks for disabled and lactating mothers. And the agencies have the checks to give them, was sitting on the checks until they're getting stale dated. They're over 4 months old. They have 640 people in a small area who pre-qualify for PATH, which is a government small social safety net, which means a lot for those people. And they have been sitting on the list for 6 months. right? With nobody thinking, what to do with it, what to do to get in there and correct the problem. Because these are people, that is what is going to lift them out of their apathy and begin to give them some empowerment. You go into South India, you have 40% of their kids not immunized. Jamaica may be calling about COVID vaccine, but Jamaican low-income families are already committed to immunization, which has saved the lives of many people in this country. You usually look for about 90% vaccine for DPT, BCG, etc. It's 40% in South St. Andrew. So those areas that will have impact on human life is not there. That's it. I want to get your feedback on seeing how those guys it's not just investment for the next 20 years. It must be investment that will have transforming effect on the community. And that's what I want. Those who are working there can give me some idea. And if we have to change the law to ensure that, then we change the law. That's why we're here legislating. If you have to change policy, it will also come out of this committee. That's where we're concerned. But those factors, those street events I mentioned, really shake me up. The problem. I think Ms. Ford wanted to come in, and then Senator Campbell, she was ahead of you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just wanted for us to just speak a little around the vulnerability of communities. Mr. Sweeney indicated that vulnerable communities need significant assistance. Many of these communities are characterized by poor infrastructure, just degraded, neglected over time, not maintained. So as part of the redevelopment, naturally the infrastructure has to be dealt with. But I think another critical part beyond the physical environment is the people who live in the communities. And I find that somehow we seem to sidestep the issue of family and family life and the stability around people. And there seems to be a thinking, when I hear the discussions, that matters relating on the personal side must be externalized to the state. And I'm not hearing enough focus being placed on what responsibility parents have for their children in respect of their education, their upbringing, in respect of a number of things. Because we know that family units that are held together are usually able to deal with issues before they spill over in the public space. And what I think I see from my limited exposure is the absence of something in the homes to hold the units together, so everything automatically spills in the public space, and then it is the state that is being called on to take responsibility. I think somehow we skirt around that side of the problem. Naturally, government should do what it is tasked to do. It should deliver the services that the agencies of state are assigned to do, and whatever else it has responsibility for. But what is the connection between what should be happening in the homes and the responsibility for people on the people side? That I'm not hearing, and for the life of me, I don't know how we're going to develop a nation if we do not have strong, coherent family units on which to build out the nation. The research shows that every nation that has held it together has done so because of the strength of family units, which we learn in a basic way is a core building block. And I'm not hearing anything. We are hearing about the problems, and all I'm hearing about is what the state should do, and the state must do what it ought to do. But that is not all of it, and I don't know where we're going to have that discussion.
I think the city security secretariat is due here on the next sitting, and I think they'll have to bring their supporting staff from after that security. I think while I can't ask the Sweeney to return, I think they should be here for this discussion in terms of dealing with the issues of what we term the human development side of activity, because a lot of the deficiency I've identified was recognized in looking at the security plan. I mean, we'll have to bring them to discuss that with the members so they can get a better feel of. I said, your input is certainly a value in going forward, and not in terms of when you're developing the plan, and maybe should look. That's what I was hoping to get from you, how we look at making adjustment, and I need the members to look at the legislation to see if we need to make legislative adjustments. The mandate for JSif is very clear in terms of what you do. How we're going to ensure that the service ministries from SDC, Education, Labor and Social Security will play their part in executing the change we require so that we can have an exit strategy. So by the time you leave, there will be normal behavior. In other words, do we need to have a special budget, and should, for example, Labor and Social Security increase the PAD program for people in that particular community? A number of questions that we'll have to answer, and if we need to put it in legislation, Mr. Sweeney. I don't think today you can give your experience in there. I'd ask to look at it and maybe even come back for a second discussion, if not a presentation, from your perspective, because JSif has worked in this community now for maybe 40 years?
25.
Wow. Didn't get that?
25 years.
No, 20. But JSif came to Flanker in 97. Yeah, so it's 25 years. 25. Correct. 25 years you have been on there. So you have the most experience of this kind of work. I think besides, you have given an outline of what we have done in the zones of special operations. It was the first piece of legislation that brought in the idea of having social service development. It is clearly limited in terms of what you've been asked to do. So I think it'd be good for you to, based on your experience, analyze it more effectively. We'll have to do a proper study of exit strategy, but you could comment and give us some guidance. And I said if it's need to change the legislation, because that's what we are looking at today, to ensure that that can happen. Because what happens is that the other agencies will not do anything while they are there. So you come to fix a school. You fix a school, but that's all you do. You give a new building, and it's nice for 2 years. But there's nothing done to look at the quality of education going to school. Whether they need a lab, they need a gym, they need teachers who are maybe specially contracted. The Social Security don't go because they're afraid to go in there. Long after you're gone, they realize that things have changed when there's crime, that they come and they do something. And they do it out of fears. So I think it may be best if you are willing to, and I don't, if members will agree, that you document that side of your view, your argument, in a detailed way. Because no other agency have done this kind of work for the time they've been in. And I said, just telling us what you do. What you have offered so far is still very light in terms of what we should do. And it is not part of your mandate to go beyond that. Take a question, Senator Golding, though. Don't it?
Chair, thank you very much. I want to also thank Mr. Sweeney and his team who have worked in these communities. I endorse your comments, Chair, and the comments of the members of the committee who have spoken so far, because I do agree that an invitation to Mr. Sweeney and his team to return to report to us in relation to the qualitative analysis of what has been happening in these communities and where we're going, with some indication of the targets that they wish to meet and what the exit strategy, as yourself and Member Jackson referred to, is absolutely essential to determining whether or not the legislation is working and what changes, if any, need to be made. But I wanted to also ask two sort of very specific questions in relation to the time that it takes for JSif to engage in these communities once a ZOSO is declared. What kind of lag time are we talking about before your intervention begins, if any? And also, I note in terms of your recommendations, before I get to that, the lag time before you engage, as well as how much time, based on your experience in these communities, do you now believe the interventions of the type that JSif makes are required in terms of the length of time you need to be in these communities before you can effectively achieve the targets you wish to achieve and before you can exit? So that gives us, I think, an idea of how much how much intervention time is required under the Act. My other observation in relation to the report that you have submitted, and thank you very much for this report. I note in your recommendations, one of the recommendations you make at number 4 is to enforce the code of conduct to govern the conduct of the security forces. And please forgive me if my eyes and understanding did not catch it in the body of your report, but I wasn't finding a connection between the substance of your report and that recommendation. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit about what observations you have made in relation to the conduct of the security forces and the impact of those observations in relation to the interventions that you're making. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for those. Thank you for the question. I'll go straight to the lag time. Once a ZOSA is declared, depending on the community, we can respond instantly, or we may have a lag time depending on what the immediate need of the community is to what we're saying. And to give an example, if the major deficit in the community is physical infrastructure, you're going to need time to do designs, procurement, etc. If the community has good infrastructure, but what may be needed is small business support and social services, then the lag time, of course, is reduced significantly. The truth is that our presence in these vulnerable communities over the years gives us the advantage of pretty much anywhere a ZOSO is called, JSif would have had knowledge of that community. So there is hardly a community that we have to go in and gain knowledge. And so we're able to mobilize quite quickly. Now, that's JSif. And bear in mind that there's nothing that JSif does that there isn't another ministry, department, or agency responsible for. Right? So everything we do, there is a government ministry, department, or agency that has the responsibility. And so we live or operate on a principle that we have to get a no objection from the responsible agency, and also negotiate what the terms of engagement will be. So typically that is the case, and I wanted to just use this opportunity to make the point that we will do the qualitative analysis as the committee has recommended, that we can look at some of the outputs of these responsible agencies versus what we have done and see where the deficits really are. In terms of the time required to be there, 6 years is the minimum time for us to holistically engage a community, and even start 6 years. Right? And I'm saying this to you after being in 30 communities since 2006, doing these holistic types of interventions. It's different when you go in a community to build a school or a road or something and come out. That's different. But when we go in vulnerable, volatile communities, and we have to go in first, build trust, build capacity, build community leadership, apply the interventions, and sustain, it requires at least 6 years. So 3 years for Mount Salem is not abnormal for us to say we're at the midterm in Mount Salem in terms of where these ZOSAs are, because in our methodology of working in communities, Dr. Chang will tell you, we were not in flankers for less than 6 years. We were there probably 10 years, if you look at the time we entered till when we have left. And so 6 years is the minimum.
You haven't left yet.
We haven't left yet, yes. And this is why I made the point earlier that these vulnerable communities require a medium to long-term type of thinking and planning if you are going to really put them on the path to sustainability and operation. I'm going to ask Mona to deal with the comment on the code of conduct enforcement, because she works a lot with the forces and on the ground in the community, and she would be better placed to answer the question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Sweeney. I just wanted us as well to answer another question in terms of the whole idea of our intervention points. When we go into a community, let's just use an example, for example, Denham Town, where you have, depending on how you define the community boundaries, you have 4 primary schools and 1 high school. When we are intervening within that space in terms of the schools, we're not just focused on only looking at the infrastructure. We're also analyzing the grade 4 achievement test data. We're looking at path enrollment. So we're also not only looking at the physical dimension, but also looking at the quality of education that is being delivered, and also student achievement. And as well too, working very closely with the Parent Teaching Association to ensure that we have that strong relationship with the school body, and that there's a level of self-agency by the parents to be responsible for their children's own education. Now, unfortunately, as we think about what are some of the elements involved in developing a person and within the wider context of a community, we have done well on certain dimensions. And the Prime Minister highlighted some gaps. When we enter the communities, we would have loved to see at this particular point in time much more growth or traction in terms of some of the health indicators. The connection to, for example, to the PATH programs. At the last meeting we had in December, there were over 500 persons now to be enrolled, and that has been lagging from 2017. So we definitely would have seen, you have seen me highlight some of the key areas, but yet still, when we think about the overall development of a person, of a community, of a family, several dimensions are missing. We have been working very closely with the National Parenting Support Commission in terms of working through the parenting places to build the capacity of parents in terms of parenting their children in a way that is acceptable, I mean, under the law. And again, too, that is work done, but I must say there's a significant way to go as well. Because a gap in that situation is that whereby we have seen significant work being done with parents at the primary level and to an extent the secondary level, what we're seeing is really the need to strengthen parenting programs that are reaching out to high-risk youth, for example, the ones who are being suspended, the ones who are being expelled. So whereby you'll find that the parents who are attending the PTA meetings, the kids are coming to school quite regularly. And in looking at parenting, for example, I'm saying that there has been traction, but there's also gaps. So you'll find, for example, that parents of low-risk youngsters, we're talking about low-risk in the sense that they are attending school, there's no behavioral issues, you will find that the engagement of those persons are quite strong. Where you have, for example, the offenders, the juvenile offenders, the parents of juvenile offenders, the parents of youngsters who have an issue in terms of high risk of suspension and expulsion from school, that is where we have to strengthen. So across the board, within the various sectors and the various project segments, while we're seeing successes in certain areas, there are obviously areas of gaps, and would have loved to see, for example, much more work being done by the Ministry of Health in the areas. And the Ministry of Labour and Social Security indicate that they would be wrapping up their programs this year in terms of connecting persons to PATH, etc. But we cannot. What we presented here today is just really a synopsis of a small segment of what it really means to develop a community, develop a person. We try our best to intervene at all levels in terms of the individual level, the family level, and the community level. But within those various nodes, there are also gaps. And so that is the reason for the recommendation in terms of ensuring that we have greater level of participation on the SIC and that we're not very lopsided in the terms of the interventions and the programs being delivered. Secondly, we also pointed out the fact that we have to invest very heavily in terms of the very robust baseline data that we will use to be able to say what is the existing situation when we enter and to be able to have measurable and credible results along the way. To answer your question specifically as it relates to the code of conduct, we have worked very, very closely with security forces, and within the zones there are normally mechanisms to ensure that any complaints, etc., against security forces can be adequately addressed. In the initial stages, that was very robust, but I believe that there has been some falling off, and the residents are still saying that there is need to have that strengthened in terms of attention to human rights by the security forces, their rights not being violated, and the complaint mechanism, etc. That is the issue I was speaking about when I spoke about the code of conduct.
Chair, thank you. Just a follow-up, if I might, because I appreciate the response. I wonder if in that follow-up attendance before the committee, if you could perhaps give us some of the data in relation to that. I found it curious in the report because it was a recommendation that wasn't spoken about in the rest of the report. And it struck me, particularly because my friends who do not support the ZOSO have always used that as a reason why, the concerns of human rights violations and conduct of the security forces, but I want us to be very responsible in our consideration of it at the committee level, so that if there is support for it, then let's discuss it. But if there's no support for it, then it ought not perhaps be in the recommendation without more.
Before you come in, Senator Brown, no, I think I'll allow the team to respond. I think I said it would be useful for the presentation here is what they have done. They're not brought to recommendation on the legislation. And I think I'd ask that we have the two other teams here for this evening, that Mr. Sweeney, based on the question being asked, take a look at what has happened in the zones, and look at where the legislation, what they have been told to do, what they have done their job, would they need any changes to improve on that, and also based on the experience to guide us as we go forward. A lot of the questions that we are asking you, quite frankly, is not for JSif to answer. You know, they're not the JSif remit, and for them is so, who's a very good on the social work side, but they're forcing to go almost textbook responses here now. What they need is, for example, I know you did some work on truancy in Mount Salem. What is that level? What has been done to prevent it reverting? What is the literacy in the schools, so that you know when you leave 5 years' time, the schools are different schools, people want to go there. Some of those data could be useful, Mr. Sweeney, and I think you will need time to put that together, and then we answer those questions, because you're not really, I don't think you're quite prepared for so much of the social side questions, and it was really not your mandate. I said it was always a mandate of JSif to do major environmental transformation and then some supporting service in the infrastructure. In the ZOZOs, it was re-emphasized and they've expanded, but still not the level it is. And you made a comment at the beginning, which I think I'd like you to come back when other people are here, is that all the work you're doing is done by other agencies, and those agencies should be in at the beginning. And I'd like your comment on that, because you know it can't be that the schools wait until you come there to fix the school, they fix it and then see what can be done. The entire educational process be looked at from infant to secondary, which is where the government is obligated to. So I think some comments from you based on your experience. I mean, you have done some transfer work in Muncie, none in Flanker. We're trying to do that now at the back end. But you have done extensive work in Flanker. I mean, literally transformed physically the place. We haven't had the kind of changes in the and there are opportunities around for jobs as well, but we just have had any focus on that side of the activity. And I really like to, if we need to make legislative changes. So I would really suggest, Mr. Sweeney, without taking too much of your time, that we discuss a second appearance with that, when you can apply your mind to your experience, what you might see to change, and as well as answer some more questions. And I suggest the committee, if there are agreement, allow me to, and then we take the JSif at least. I don't think we may end up taking both teams this evening, given the time. I mean, I have no limit, but as far as most people would want to leave here at a reasonable hour. And their report will also be critical in looking at how we, what we do going forward. You're entitled to, Mr. Brown. What is your comment? Do you think it is of value? Because I said I think we're going to go in a lot of circle on the social intervention side. But that's a big part of this thing, but they are not the one mandated to do it in the way it should be done.
Is Mr. Sweeney going to respond to that before I... Is Mr. Sweeney going to respond before I...
Well, he does not respond to me. I'm asking my committee members that if we allow him to literally stop now and come back to us with a better outline of how we view the social services side, which is where we have the gap. But the physical side seems to everybody's happy getting the roads fixed, getting the water.
I'd like to raise some issues so that he may take that into account when he's
coming
back.
Sure, no problem.
So with your permission, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to ask if JSif will share with the committee a copy of the Barrett Town survey, which was mentioned, because it's a non-ZOZO route, so we can see whether or not it is possible to do things to improve communities without the formal, expensive ZOZO. And sorry?
It's in Bartow and Flanker. What is different?
No, what I'm trying to look at is what they did there. I may want to then ask the cost of doing it. But I'm happy for the communities who are benefiting it. Let us be clear. But let us also not pretend that it is not very expensive, what we're doing. And we see for space, safer space, we see for human capacity development, which we have not had a costing for. So again, I repeat what I said the last time, including the costing
on Baritone,
including the,
and won't say them separately. What the costing on Baritone as well to compare?
No, I'm not asking for Baritone because I want a copy of the survey that was done.
In Baritone?
Yeah.
To compare with some of these?
Yeah, and then I may want to ask later on about the costing for Baritone to see what model is the best model for us. In terms of JSif, you said in the theory of change at point 3 that evidence exists on what works to prevent crime, violence, and enhance safety. And we'd certainly love a listing of that evidence so we can also look at it. Right? The legislation, Chairman, at Clause 3 lists 8 objectives. The second to last is promote social and economic development in a zone through the efforts of various government agencies and civil society, which seems to be what JSif is doing. And that's on page 3 of the legislation. So, yeah. So that's 3F of the objectives. And it's probably the only one, but it is becoming clear that addresses the economic issues. But it's clear to us that that is the issue we face. And when you look at 4.2, which is the basis of the Prime Minister declaring zones of special zones of special operation. It says there, the circumstances referred to in subsection 1 are that there are reasonable grounds to believe that due to rampant criminality, gang warfare, escalating violence and murder, and the threat of the rule of law and public order, it is necessary to do so. And it strikes me, just looking at all of these committee chairman, that all the communities or zones that would fit that 4.2 definition, that poor infrastructure, and all the things that JSif is saying we need to address. Under developmental human capacity. So in a sense, maybe the legislation that we have, because this definition of 4.2 could fit probably 700 communities, not 20, in the country. And what we need to be looking at, because I take it Zozo is a good faith effort to address the crime thing, is how do we deal with community development throughout the country? Because these things which define the zones are defined themselves by this poor infrastructure and neglect of the people. So I just crafted something which says, it appears to me that the Zozo is an expensive band-aid for the existential issue of poverty and inequality in the society. And unless we address that, 4 or 6 Zozos not going to solve the problem. And so I'm not looking for exit strategies, because the only exit strategy that we can have is a strategy of dealing with the poverty of our people throughout the country and for over many, many years. So unless we address those issues, as the security force own report saying, you deal with this area and people migrate. And so I'd like to borrow Joe Biden closing. God bless our troops. God bless the police and the military, because we're giving them baskets to carry water. And that's how it appeared to me, that the Zozo is inadequate because it does not address everything. And as I say, I repeat, Zozo is an expensive band-aid. We can't get the full cost yet for the existential issue of poverty and inequality. And if we address that, and the fruit of it, Chairman, is that when we look at the national crime stats, despite 3 years of Zozo, we're still running above 2012 or 2015. We're still running above in terms of murders and so forth. So unless we set out as a country to say we're going after the poverty that exists so starkly, whether in Mount Salem or Greenwich Farm or Augustown or Flankers or any other communities throughout the city and throughout the country, we are, in a sense, just putting Band-Aid on a serious cancer. And I urge that in reviewing Zozo, we look at how we're going to spend the budget of the country in addressing the issue of the poverty and inequality. And I start there as my contribution today, because I look forward to Zozo coming back to us, as I look forward to the basket that we have given the security forces to attack this issue. Because we expect of them to make the transformation of the people in these communities. And I'm not feeling that transformation taking place after 3 years. Mr. Sweeney says 6 years, maybe, but even after 6 years, because, Chairman, if we're truthful to ourselves, some of these programs that Mr. Sweeney and his team is carrying out, like, remind me of Lift Up Jamaica, because Lift Up Jamaica was to deal with, Philip, the removal of zinc fence and improve community infrastructure. So it's not new, but the question is, why hasn't it succeeded? And that's what probably Mr. Sweeney will come to tell us. So that's Lift Up Jamaica. JSif thankfully, we have resisted the IMF desire to close you down. Am I correct? The IMF wanted to close you down, just as they closed down the Social Development Commission work in the 70s. So we as a country have to look to ask ourselves, where are we going to invest? Do we invest it in the way the IMF wants us to invest it against our people? Or are we going to invest it more? You know, and if you take Minster Chuck, a lot of investment was done in Grand Spain, and that was good. I don't remember. Can you remind me? Remind me. I'm just trying to ask you. Remind me if you can tell me. You can't remember who did it? Oh, thank you. Oh, you remember now? Yeah. I know a lot of work was done there. And it created transformation. So, and there's no Zozo. So again, I'm asking, is Zozo the only route? Is Zozo a necessary part of the process? Or are we missing the critical issue of the poverty and the inequality for too long, over several administrations in the communities? And that is what I think we need to address.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Brown. You're setting some, and there are a couple of hands up. I'll take them, Mr. Miller, Mr. Centers, and Ms. Ford. But just for some clarification, some statistics, not so much to be contingent, Senator. The troubled community in Jamaica have been long identified, and I thought it is, I said, well, I agree, not much has been done to address them in a systematic way. We go back to the analysis. The PIOJ of Jamaica identified 100 communities in Jamaica in 2009 that ought to have special attention because the social services to those communities, the human services to them, were flat. It was the emphasis social deficient. In fact, I remember very vividly because there were two severely deprived, what they call social deprived communities. One was in my constituency then, and one was in the constituency of who became Prime Minister later, MP Portia Simpson Miller. The White Wing and Gully communities were the two most severely social deprived communities in Jamaica. And they're all nest of social problems. So those social communities were clearly identified. And within that grouping, and maybe 2 or 3 added to it now, it is not said, the problems are quite large for the country, but much of the criminality and killing emerged from 25 communities. The statistics clear them. That's where most of our gangs come from. That's where most of our prisoners come from. And 20 are particularly bad. And that's why the concept of a zone of special designed to address those core 25. But the activities ought to be involving all the other 100 communities. That was the concept of the community renewal program, out of which this is flowing. And the PIOJ still has that there. So it's recognized, but the zones, as I said, are designed to, and this particular difference with the zone, not so much Lift Up Jamaica, which was in my constituency as well, worked with it well. The Inner City Basic Services Program is what is almost a mirror image of what they're doing now, right, which ran for a number of years. But the security element was added, because I just felt that the safety element was crucial to have long-term success, which essentially means you disrupt the gangs and divert the youngsters who are to join and either transform the old ones or lock them up. That was the real, that in a short story what they expected to happen, so that the community could now proceed on a normal footing, because the young people are going into schools, getting skills, and young men are developing normally as productive young males in the society rather than joining gangs. So you have to provide an alternative to gang membership for development of the young men and to disrupt the older gangs. I'm sorry, I think I have 3 names, but Mr. Miller has not spoken at all yet, nor Senator. So, AGA, if you don't mind me taking them first. Start with Mr. Miller from Portmore.
Thank you, Sir Chairman. You basically articulated majority of what I wanted to say, but just to add to it, I think what my colleague stated earlier in terms of a Band-Aid, expensive Band-Aid, I want to distance myself from that statement, but just to add that, as Sir Sweeney articulated a short while ago, that it took 6 years in one community. As a people, sometimes we are trying to see the results overnight, but I think if, we implement the system that is there, and give it time to work, then we will see the results in short order. I don't think in terms of, implementing the ZOZO in these communities that is expensive to empower our people and give them an opportunity and an alternative in terms of livelihood. So I would just ask my colleague just to, give it some time to, although I respect your opinion, but give it some time to work, and, the facets that are there, will give the fruits of our labor in a reasonable time.
We're trying to get ideas to review the law. I don't want to initiate a debate. It's the social intervention is a very sensitive issue. Senator Samuda, but I'd like us to focus, I said, on the results that have come in so far and where we need to make either policy changes or legislative changes to ensure that the gaps are filled. So Senator made a general comment which Mr. Sweeney can respond to. Do we need to broaden it? Do we look at the 20 community specialists still? Those are questions we have to answer today. Senator Samuda, then Ms. Ford.
I'll attempt to be as succinct as possible, Minister. In following up on certainly your comments and those of my colleague, Senator Brown, the legislation before us cannot attempt to be an economic panacea to deal with all developmental issues within any geographic area in the country. If we look at the very first line, and I take your point about the sub-objectives, but it's an act to provide for special measures for upholding and preserving the rule of law, public order, citizen security, and public safety within certain geographically defined areas of Jamaica and for connected matters. Now, to my mind, what that means is that in many cases, as we know, and I'm sure the security forces will touch on in their presentations, there are particular environmental factors that sometimes hamper the work of the police, the work of the JDF in providing security for citizens. Now, when you go into an area and you clear it as the phases are labeled, you allow, in my mind, the work of the Social Intervention Committee to address those environmental factors so that the hardworking men and women of the security forces are then able to do their work in providing the security. Now, I can think of many communities that have had interventions, but I would think that the target of the interventions that we're making here cannot be expected to address every single developmental issue. What we should be reviewing in terms of the reports that come to us, whether they address the environmental issues that firstly would hamper the security forces doing their work and functioning in a particular area. And then secondly, do they provide and trigger the interventions with, certainly the at-risk communities. And then thirdly, do they give does this intervention, which we've labeled as ZOSO, give the freedom and space for the state agencies and entities that perhaps have not been functioning in that space to come in and actually do their work? I don't know that the work of all state agencies can fall to Mr. Sweeney's capable hands, but it is the interventions that allow for state agencies to come in that I expect certainly from that committee. And certainly, I think generally when I look at the reports that come to us on a periodic basis, I think it's quarterly, I think most of those interventions allow for that. But I don't think it is reasonable to expect that even through the capable chairmanship of the social intervention committees, that all of these issues that are being put to them are going to be solved. What I would certainly like to hear, and I'd ask the security forces in their presentations, even though I've read your submissions, to indicate where, especially the addressing of the environmental factors, whether it's roadways that you couldn't access before, the issues that come with police in areas with zinc fence, whether we're doing enough to address those issues in a way that normal policing can take hold in these communities after. That's my comments.
I'm just going to ask, I'm only taking more comments from JSif, because most of these decisions are, I said, deal with the program itself. The legislation we haven't touched yet. AG, you had a file, take a final comment.
In the interest of time, you may proceed to the next segment.
Mr. Sweeney,
we can come back to.
We'll discuss the staff will discuss with you coming back another event. And on that occasion, we have to have the city security program people here, team, so we can look at what was being done to take on some of the questions that are being addressed to you. It's a bit unfair to you when you're primarily dealing with physical infrastructure, with those having added some, the social level really addition and not a mainstream activity in fairness. And I've worked very close with JSif, we are an excellent agency over the years, and we have done fantastic work in several areas in St. James, which at one stage, well, almost still, but not so bad now. We went to the highest homicide rate in the island by far, and come out of some very difficult areas where you have done some excellent work. I think this side of it, and comments have been made from several individuals which you need to take into account, and your experience could be used when you're coming back. And we'll have the other team here who is now in the new dispensation is supposed to focus on social services and human development. So I'm going to ask the members to come later and then they come back and begin the next phase with the police force. And I said the critical element or difference between ICBSP and ZOZO was that we introduced a security for safety element in the process to give the time for the services to build out and provide a new kind of community in a safe environment. Because the fact is that in many cases, workers who the social service work don't even want to go in some of the communities. And it also had there was a challenge for the policing as well, in what the traditional relationship in those communities with the police was almost always antagonistic. And this whole new approach is designed to bring about not only a safe environment, but a new relationship with the police and those citizens who wish to conduct themselves as law-abiding citizens. So I'm going to ask, I understand Ms. White is leading from the Legal Affairs Department, and she has the support of several other superintendents who have had the experience in the team. So I'm going to ask her to lead off on the JSif presentation, and we can at least get that tonight, even if we don't complete that.
Chair, just before Ms. White, we got the JDF submission today because of confidentiality. I suspect you're not intending to take it.
No,
today.
I'm going to ask the colleague back and we take it in camera next week.
Good,
next meeting, all right? Because they're very detailed in the operation that they asked, and when I read it, I agree with them. They gave a very detailed operational view, which may be best discussed by the members of Parliament first, and then we decide what we want to put in the public space, and the senators. So, Ms. White, that's JSif now.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and your members. The JSif team today is represented by, to my far right, Mr. Wayne Cameron, Senior Superintendent of Police and Joint Commander for the Greenwich Town Zone. Beside him is Mr. Terence Sanko, Superintendent of Police and Joint Commander for the Denham Town Zone. Behind him, Ms. Jacqueline Coombs, Senior Superintendent of Police and Joint Commander for the August Town Zone. And directly behind me is Mr. Dwight Powell, Senior Superintendent and Joint Commander for the Mount Salem Zone. And I am Alethea White, Director of Legal Affairs Division at the JSif. So I first want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and your members for the opportunity to review this particular piece of legislation and provide our comments and feedback, as it has been a very useful tool in our fight against crime. The JSif submissions were sent on Monday, and those are the submissions that I intend to go through this afternoon. The submissions, Mr. Chairman, were divided into two main parts. The first part, we're giving an overview of the 4 current zones, and thereafter we are making our proposals for possible amendments to the current legislation. So beginning on page 1 with the overview of the zones, Mr. Chairman, in relation to the Mount Salem zone. Now, a section of the Mount Salem community was selected for designation as a zone of special operations, having met the criteria of rampant criminality, gang warfare, escalating violence and murder, and threat to the rule of law and public order. Prior to the establishment of the zone, the Mount Salem community had been plagued with increased gang-related violence and criminal activities among several gangs operating from within the community. The gang warfare was attributed to the quest for turf control and the disproportionate allocation of illegal proceeds from lottery scamming and other illicit activities. The implementation of the zone was therefore a necessity so as to reduce the high levels of crime in the communities within that geographical area, as well as to improve the social condition of the residents within the said communities. The zone was declared on September 1, 2017 for a period of 60 days, which ended on October 30, 2017. A further 18 consecutive 60-day periods of extension have since been granted. And the last extension, Mr. Chairman, was granted on January 8, 2021 for a period of 60 days. Since the implementation of the zone, there has been a reduction in the numbers of murders and shooting incidents within the community. During the period September 1, 2017 to December 31, 2020, the zone experienced 2 murders and 4 shooting incidents. This amounts to a reduction of 88% in murders and 87% in shooting incidents over the period when compared to the period of May 2014 to August 2017, which is an equivalent period of 40 months prior to the implementation of the zone, where in that period, the community recorded 17 murders and 30 shooting incidents. The joint force in the Mount Salem zone has participated in several social intervention activities with a view of building back the community so as to ensure that the residents feel safe and secure. The joint force has been in constant collaboration with the following agencies: the Social Development Commission, the National Works Agency, the Community Development Committee, Benevolent Society, Heart Trust NT, and of course the Jamaica Social Investment Fund. And then we go on to list, Mr. Chairman, some of the different activities that have taken place in the zone. And you can see that those include academic development and enrichment programs, improved drainage systems, road restoration and resurfacing, birth certificate, and national ID drive. So we have listed some of the activities that have taken place. Moving on to the Denham Town zone. Now, the Denham Town community was plagued with serious crimes, including murders and shootings caused by feuds between the Tivoli Gardens gang and the gangs in Denham Town. The Denham Town zone was declared on October 17, 2017 for a period of 60 days, which ended on December 16, 2017. A further 17 consecutive 60-day extensions were subsequently granted, and the zone is currently in force until February 19, 2021. Since the implementation of the zone, there has been a reduction in the number of murder and shooting incidents. During the period of October 17, 2017 to September 18, 2020, the zone experienced 30 murders and 36 shooting incidents. This amounts to a reduction of 30% in murders and 60% in shooting incidents over the period when compared to an equivalent period of 1,068 days prior to the implementation of the zone, when it recorded 43 murders and 89 shooting incidents. However, since the declaration of the zone and as at December 19, 2020, a total of 35 murders and 58 shooting incidents have been recorded in the zone. The police, along with the Jamaica Social Investment Fund and Fight for Peace, are moving towards launching 3 new initiatives as a means to create social intervention activities, thereby allowing residents to participate. Among these activities are a football competition between JSif members of the Joint Force and Golden Heights residents, as well as educational programs under the theme Safe Families, Safe Community, Safe Nation, which is focused on providing residents with the tools on how to improve their lives. Another initiative being implemented is the use of the curfew monitoring program to ensure that children are in school, whether online or otherwise, during school hours. Also, representatives of JSif are currently conducting verification of small business owners who had applied for a special grant of $400,000 to improve their businesses. In relation to the Greenwich Town zone, now, the Greenwich Town community had also been plagued with increased gang-related violence and criminal activities among several gangs operating from communities within the St. Andrews South Division. The zone was declared on July 1, 2020 for a period of 60 days. A further 3 consecutive 60-day periods were subsequently granted, and the last period of extension was granted on December 31, 2020 for a period of 60 days. Since the implementation of the zone, there has also been a reduction in the number of murders and shooting incidents. During the period July 1, 2020 to December 18, 2020, there were no murders or shooting incidents committed within the community. This represents a reduction of 200% in murders and 200% in shooting incidents over the period when compared to the period of July 1, 2019 to December 18, 2019, prior to the implementation of the zone, during which 2 murders and 2 shooting incidents were recorded. There has not yet been any social intervention activity within this zone. However, the security forces have received positive feedback from residents in the zone who feel safe and secure due to their presence in the communities. In relation to the Augustown zone, the Augustown community had been plagued with increased gang-related violence and criminal activities among several groups operating from communities within the St. Andrews Central Police Division. The zone was declared on July 8, 2020 for a period of 60 days. A further 3 consecutive 60-day periods of extension were granted. The last period of extension was granted on January 7, 2021 for 60 days. Since the implementation, there has been a reduction in the number of murders and shooting incidents. During the period July 8, 2020 to December 31, 2020, there were no murders or shooting incidents committed within the community. This amounts to a reduction of 900% in murders and 800% in shooting incidents over the period when compared to the period immediately preceding the zone of January 1, 2020 to July 7, 2020, during which 9 murders and 8 shooting incidents were recorded. As a part of our social intervention within the Augustown community, the JSif continues to reinforce the importance of revitalizing the Augustown Police Youth Club. The St. Andrews Central Community Safety and Security Team continues to host the Police Youth Club meetings every Saturday, and it is believed that having this youth club re-established within the community will prove to be a success, as same is being wholeheartedly welcomed by residents. Additionally, there are several projects being implemented under the Government of Jamaica Integrated Community Development Project Phase 2 in the community of Augustown. Now, these projects include the DP2 Enterprise Development Grant Project, which is a business support project for micro and small enterprises within the ICDP2 communities to include Augustown. The aim of the project is to develop the entrepreneurial abilities of owners through training and funding of priority equipment to ultimately increase profits and provide employment. The Solid Waste Management Project, which is designed to maintain the cleanliness of the community by selecting, training, and employing residents to serve as community environmental wardens. The Rehabilitation of Parks and Green Spaces Project, which will entail the construction of small parks and gardens and the installation of play equipment and park furniture in the communities. The Police Supervised Youth Curfew Monitor Project, which includes 21 volunteer residents who will be trained in areas such as the introduction to the Safe Community Program, customer service, and child care and protection, so as to equip them with the necessary skills to perform their tasks under this program. So that is the overview of the 4 current zones. Now we're going to go on to the proposals for amendment that JSif.
Thank you, Mr. I just want to see you.
No point.
Before, no, we don't want to take, we're going to let her complete, but I'm going to ask you.
No, just, I'm also wondering if we should take these.
Yeah?
I'm wondering if we should take these proposals now when there are other people who are going to present us, so we can get a sense of the overall picture before just hearing these specific amendments to the legislation, so we could get a sense from the other agencies who are reporting on this thing. That's just my suggestion.
Well, it may be necessary to let them get a presentation and you defend it. Before we won't make a decision on it now, you know, but to have them present their case, because we're not going to be able to have all of them here one time. Before we take the question saying the presentation for JDF was distributed today, I don't think we'll be able to take it today. So I'm going to ask the members if you're leaving early or if we leave to return it to the clerk until we discuss and then decide how we want to treat it after that. All right? They were much more detailed in the operational activities, so that's why they want to. You'll get it back when you see next week. All right? And then, yeah.
I'm going to get it back at 2 o'clock next week.
Yeah.
When will I read it?
No, that is how we have treated JDF, actually. I said, and if we wish to keep it, then we can make a collective decision. But they have asked for it because it's very detailed operation in there. We'd prefer have it confidential until then for members.
Yeah, the problem with that, Chair, is that it does not allow me as a member of the committee to read. I guarantee confidentiality of it, but I need to at least have a chance to read it. So don't give me 3 years of work in a couple of minutes to read. It doesn't make sense, right? So again, I'm urging a flexibility. So,
Chairman,
and I give my confidentiality in treating with it.
Chairman, I fully appreciate the concern of the member, but since the JDF will be presenting, it wouldn't really be at a disadvantage, and there isn't necessarily a requirement for the presentation to be submitted in the format. But we do have to treat with the disclosure of the operational details with a high degree of caution, not because the member himself may become delinquent, but matters can be left. So it's important that they be collected.
I've heard the comments from Member Brown, but if the JDF, I haven't read the report, but if they have endorsed their report confidential, then I believe that they should know why. And you have indicated that it contains, and in fact you went even further to say in their presentation it may be done in camera. So I do believe
do
that...
it in camera, and if the committee members, what aspect they may wish to make public.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I believe that having gone that far, Mr. Chairman,
there were much more detail in
it should be...
There are much more detail in the operational report than the other teams, and I think we should respect that. And then,
I think so.
If the members after read it, when you have it next occasion, you want to keep it after that, we can make a collective decision. But I think we should allow everybody to get a chance to see it and hear their presentation and why they presented it like this, because the format is quite different from the normal report. And we can make a collective decision in camera if what we want to get from it. All right.
Just to remind Chairman that these are the established protocols in dealing with matters with the JDF, even when it comes to budgetary matters and a subcommittee. They're just established protocols. While I appreciate the point of the member, but to the extent that the presentation will be made, there is no loss.
If both of you are talking at the same time.
So when we have seen it and gone through it with the JDF, we may even reverse that decision, but I said the protocol is on our first presentation. We normally go in camera with JDF matters, especially the operational thing, in Parliament, budget and everything. So we do it now after they're ready and we've gone through it, rather than it being discussed otherwise. All right. So the clerk will proceed. Ms. White? Okay, Ms. White, you can continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we are going to delve now into the second part of our submissions, which deals with our proposals for amendments. The first proposal that we have made is an amendment to Section 4.1 and Section 5 to increase the initial time period in which a zone can be enforced from a period not exceeding 60 days to a period not exceeding 180 days, and to increase the further period for which a zone can be extended from a period not exceeding 60 days to a period not exceeding 120 days. And I think the presentation from JSif really cemented the point that in order to achieve the objectives of the Act, a certain amount of time is needed. Now, we recognize that Section 4.1 empowers the Prime Minister and Council to declare an area a zone for a period not exceeding 60 days. And we submit, however, that this initial 60-day period does not provide sufficient time for the objectives of the Act to be achieved. The objectives of the Act not only include a reduction in the levels of crime and violence in a zone, but also include the social and economic development of the zone. To achieve these objectives, the activities in a zone can be divided into 3 stages. We know it as the clear stage, the whole stage, and the build stage. Now, the clear stage involves increased operational activities of the security forces, such as searches and targeted raids with the aim of ridding a zone of illegal weapons and wanted men. These searches are intelligence-driven and heavily depend on information received from persons within the communities themselves. It therefore requires time for security forces and the persons in the communities to build relationships so as to ensure that the persons develop a certain level of trust with the security forces and are therefore willing to provide information. The whole stage involves the maintenance of the law and order that was achieved by ridding the zone of illegal weapons and wanted men, and ensuring that the security forces maintain a sustained presence within the zone. And the build stage involves the activities of the Social Intervention Committee, which are aimed at the social and economic development of the zone. And these activities also involve those of various government agencies, as we have highlighted during this meeting. Now, given the extent of the objectives and the wide scope of activities involved, a period of 60 days we submit is not sufficient. For example, the Greenwich Town Zone was declared on July 1, 2020. However, since then, there have only been 2 meetings of the Social Intervention Committee, and no actual social intervention program has yet been implemented. Accordingly, the build stage is still in its infancy. While it is recognized that Section 5 empowers the Prime Minister and Council, subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives, to extend the initial period for further periods, not exceeding 60 days, it is submitted that the legislation should nevertheless start from the position of having an initial period that is reasonable and sufficient in the first instance to achieve the objectives, rather than continuously having to resort to the use of extensions. It is also submitted that where resort has to be made to extending the period, the time period of extension should be increased to 120 days, given the scope of the activities involved. Our second proposal for amendment is an amendment to Section 4.2 to divide the circumstances that must exist for a zone to be declared into 2 circumstances, and to include high levels of violence as an alternative to escalating levels of violence. Now, Section 4.2 is a section that sets out the circumstances that must exist in an area for the Prime Minister and Council to declare it a zone. The Prime Minister and Council must have reasonable grounds to believe that due to the presence of 4 particular circumstances, it is necessary to declare the area as a zone. These circumstances are listed as rampant criminality, the first one, 2, gang warfare, 3, escalating violence and murder, and 4, threat to rule of law and public order. Now, we submit that the second and third circumstances are really examples of the first, as opposed to being separate and distinct. That is, gang warfare and escalating violence and murder are really examples of rampant criminality. We therefore submit that instead of listing 4 circumstances, there should instead be 2, and it is proposed that rampant criminality be the first circumstance, with gang warfare and escalating violence and murder being stated as examples of rampant criminality instead of separate circumstances. The circumstance of a threat to the rule of law and public order would remain separate and be the second circumstance. Further, it can be argued that the term escalating violence and murder limits the declaration of a zone to an area that has had an increase in the number of violent incidents and murder, as opposed to an area that has consistently had high numbers of violent incidents and murders without an actual increase to the numbers. It is submitted that an area which has had consistent high levels of violence and murder, even though there has been no increase in numbers over a particular period, should still be eligible for declaration as a zone. It is therefore recommended that the words high levels of or be placed before the words escalating violence and murder. In light of the above, we have made a proposed amendment to Section 4.2 as follows. The circumstances referred to in subsection 1 are that there are reasonable grounds to believe that due to A, rampant criminality such as gang warfare and high levels of or escalating violence and murder, and B, the threat to rule of law and public order, it is necessary to do so. The third proposal is an amendment to Section 4.5 and Section 5 to change the reference of Joint Command to that of Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defense Staff. Section 4.5 provides for the Prime Minister and Council to amend, vary, or add to the geographical limits of our zone on the recommendation of the Joint Command. Section 5 provides for the Prime Minister and Council to extend the period of a zone after consultation with the Joint Command. It is submitted for actions at this level. The Prime Minister and Council should act on the recommendation of the Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defense Staff and consult with the Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defense Staff as opposed to the Joint Command. In this regard, it is noted that Section 4.6 provides that the Prime Minister in Council can only declare an area as a zone if the Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defence Staff have agreed in writing that it should be so declared. It is submitted that the level of Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defense Staff is also the appropriate level to recommend and consult with the Prime Minister in Council on amending and extending a zone. It is therefore recommended that the reference to Joint Command in these sections be changed to Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defense Staff. Fourth recommendation is an amendment to Section 9.1 to increase the time period required for the Joint Command through the Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defense Staff to report to the National Security Council from every 10 days to every 30 days. And this is so given the proposed increase to the time period of a zone as we had outlined in our first recommendation. So if it is that the time period itself is going to be increased, we recommend that the reporting period have a corresponding increase. And we are recommending that the reporting period be increased from 10 days to 30 days. Our fifth proposal is an amendment to Section 10.1 to also provide for the Prime Minister in Council to suspend the operations in a zone where he finds it necessary without the recommendation of the Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defense Staff. Now, Section 10.1 empowers the Prime Minister in Council to suspend the operations in a zone where he considers it necessary. However, the Prime Minister in Council is limited to doing so only where the Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defense Staff have recommended same in writing. Now, we recognize that the recommendation of the Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defense Staff to suspend the operations in a zone would be necessary if the reason relates to crime and security. There may, however, be other reasons for which the operations in a zone need to be suspended, and these other reasons may not be within the purview of the Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defense Staff, so their recommendation should not be necessary for those reasons. It is therefore submitted that the Prime Minister in Council should also have the option to suspend the operations in a zone where he finds it necessary without the recommendation of the Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defense Staff. And we have proposed some wording to the section to be amended as follows. The Prime Minister in Council may suspend the operations in a zone on the written recommendation of the Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defense Staff, or where the Prime Minister in Council finds it necessary. And this is really to give more leeway to the Prime Minister in Council if operations in a zone need to be suspended for other reasons than crime and security. The sixth proposal is an amendment to Section 12.1 to empower the Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defense Staff or their designates, not below the rank of Assistant Commissioner of Police and Lieutenant Colonel, respectively, to establish a curfew as opposed to the Joint Command. The current Section 12.1 empowers the Joint Command to establish a cordon and impose a curfew. It is accepted that the establishment of a cordon should be within the purview of the Joint Command, as cordons often need to be established as an immediate on-the-ground response to curtail a particular situation. It is, however, submitted that the decision to impose a curfew should be one taken at a higher level as it involves additional considerations and implications. In this regard, we submit that the power to impose a curfew should properly reside with the Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defense Staff or their designates, not below the rank of Assistant Commissioner of Police and Lieutenant Colonel, respectively. The importance of the input from the Joint Command to determine whether a curfew should be imposed is still, however, critical, Accordingly, we further recommend that the decision of the Commissioner of Police and Chief of Defense Staff or their designates to impose a curfew should be made in consultation with the Joint Command. The 7th amendment, Mr. Chairman and you members, is for an amendment to Section 12 to actually create an offense for breaching a curfew. Now, while the Act provides for the imposition of a curfew in a zone, in order to enforce this curfew, the joint force would need to have the power to arrest and charge someone who breaches same. In order for the joint force to have the power to arrest and charge someone who breaches a curfew, the breach of the curfew itself has to first be made an offense, as powers of arrest and charge only arise in circumstances where someone has committed an offense. We note that Section 12(2) of the Act provides as follows: for the avoidance of doubt, whenever the Joint Command takes action under subsection 1, which is the cordon and curfew, any member of the joint force may, for the purpose of enforcing such action, exercise such powers as are vested in a constable. We, however, submit that this section does not go far enough and is not sufficient to enable a member of the joint force to arrest and charge someone for breaching a curfew, as the powers vested in a constable to arrest and charge only arise where an offense has been committed. It is therefore necessary to make the breach an offense in the first place. We also submit that the penalty for this offense should be a fine not exceeding $1 million or imprisonment not exceeding 6 months. We are of the view that this appropriately reflects the nature of the offense and will provide a sufficient deterrent. And we took guidance from Section 30 of the Constabulary Force Act, where the offense of obstructing and resisting a constable is also a fine not exceeding $1 million or imprisonment not exceeding 6 months. The 8th amendment that we're proposing is an amendment to Section 14(3) to remove the need for the seizure to be in connection with a search. Now, Section 14(3) empowers a constable in connection with a search to seize any vehicle, article, or document that will assist in preventing or controlling public disorder or that is likely to be of substantial value to the investigation of an offense. However, we submit by the use of the words in connection with a search, the power to seize is limited to where the seizure is done pursuant to a search. This means, for example, that if a constable finds an item in a public place that needs to be removed in order to prevent or control public disorder, the constable cannot have recourse to this section to seize the item, as the seizure would not be in connection with a search. We submit that the power to seize in a zone should not be so limited and should extend to seizure in any circumstance once the requirements that the seizure of the item will assist in preventing or controlling public disorder or that the item is likely to be of substantial value to the investigation of offense are met. We therefore recommend that the words in connection with a search be removed from the section. Our 9th proposal is an amendment of Section 14(4)(a) to allow for seizure of a tool of lawful trade or business where there is reasonable grounds to believe that the tool is likely to be used in the commission of an offense. Section 14(4)(a) prohibits the seizure of a tool of a lawful trade or business unless there is reasonable cause to believe that the tool was used or is being used in the commission of an offense. It is submitted that allowance should also be made for the tool to be seized where there is reasonable cause to believe that the tool is likely to be used in the commission of an offense as a means of preventing the commission of the offense. We therefore recommend that the section be amended to include the words or is likely to be used between the words being used and in the commission. So that is really an extension of the circumstance in which the tool of lawful trade can be seized. The 10th proposal is an amendment to Section 14 to include an offense of preventing or attempting to prevent the search by a member of the joint force. Section 14.1 empowers a member of the joint force to search any place, vehicle, or person within a zone without a warrant, where the member has reasonable suspicion that an offense is in the course of being committed or has been committed or is about to be committed. There is, however, no consequence if a person prevents or attempts to prevent the member of the joint force from exercising this power of search. While the offense of obstructing or resisting a constable in Section 30 of the Constabulary Force Act can be utilized in circumstances where a person prevents or attempts to prevent a member of the joint force who is a constable from exercising the power of search, it cannot be utilized in circumstances where the person prevents or attempts to prevent a member of a joint force who is a member of the Jamaica Defense Force from exercising the power of search. We therefore recommend that in order to assist in enforcing this power, an offense should be created for preventing or attempting to prevent the search. And we further recommend that the penalty should be a fine not exceeding $1 million or imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months. And we again took guidance from Section 30 of the Constabulary Force Act for this penalty. Our 11th proposal is an amendment of Section 15.3 to remove the reference to arising from or in connection with a search. Under Section 15.3, an officer should return a vehicle, article, or document forthwith once he has reasonable grounds to believe that it is no longer of evidential value in any criminal proceedings arising from or in connection with a search. As such, the obligation to return the item is directly linked to proceedings that relate to the search which led to the seizure of the item. However, there may be instances where the item is needed for other proceedings that are separate from those related to the search where the item was found. A strict reading of the section as currently worded would indicate that regardless of whether the item is needed for other proceedings, once it is no longer of evidential value for the proceedings in connection with the search, then it should be returned. We therefore recommend that the words arising from or in connection with a search be removed. This would then provide for the return of the item once it is no longer of evidential value in any criminal proceedings and not just in any criminal proceedings in connection with the search. Our 12th proposal, Mr. Chairman, is an amendment of Section 15.3 to include when an item which was seized to prevent or control public disorder should be returned. As previously highlighted under Section 15.3, an officer should return a vehicle, article, or document forthwith once he has reasonable grounds to believe that it is no longer of evidential value. This obligation to return is therefore in relation to items that were seized under Section 14.3, where the item is likely to be of substantial value to the investigation of an offense. Section 14.3, however, also empowers a constable to seize an item that will assist in preventing or controlling public disorder. The power to seize in these circumstances is therefore wider than the power to seize in circumstances where the item is likely to be of substantial value to the investigation of an offense. Indeed, the power to seize to prevent or control public disorder does not necessitate the commencement of an investigation. Accordingly, in addition to setting out when an item that was seized because it was likely to be of substantial value to the investigation of an offense should be returned, we submit that Section 15.3 should also set out when an item which was seized to prevent or control public disorder should be returned. It is further recommended that the criteria for return should be where the officer has reasonable grounds to believe that the item no longer poses the threat to public order. Our 13th proposal, Mr. Chairman, is an amendment to Section 16 to clarify the circumstances of arrest and detention. Now, Section 16, 2 to 5 sets out the procedure to be followed where a person is arrested or detained under the Act. It must be noted, however, that the sections do not give powers of arrest or detention. Rather, it sets out a procedure that should be followed if a person is arrested or detained under this Act. It therefore can be argued that the use of the words under this Act in Section 16.2 indicates that the procedure outlined is only applicable to persons who are arrested and detained pursuant to a provision or power provided under the Act itself, as opposed to persons who are arrested and detained under provisions or powers under other legislation. For example, if a person in a zone is arrested and detained for possession of a illegal firearm under the Firearms Act, then an argument can be made that the procedure outlined in Section 16.2-5 does not apply because the person is not being arrested pursuant to provisions under this ZOSO Act. However, upon a perusal of the Act, the only provision or power for arrest and detention appears to come from the offense created by Section 21.4 of failing to provide one's full name and address to a member of the joint force or providing a false name or address. There is no other provision under the Act which gives an officer the lawful authority to arrest and detain a person. Accordingly, it can be argued that the procedure outlined in Section 16.2-5 only apply to persons who are arrested and detained for committing an offense under Section 21.4. When one reads the procedure, however, it does not appear that it was intended to apply in such limited circumstances. For example, the reference to further investigations and identification parades in Section 16.3 appears to indicate that the procedure was intended to have general applicability to arrest and detention for any offense. We submit that the section is therefore inconsistent, as on the one hand, the use of the words under this Act appear to indicate that the section only applies to an arrest and detention under a provision or power under the Act itself, when on the other hand, the general language in this section and references to further investigations and ID parades appear to indicate that the section is applicable to any arrest or detention under the legislation. We submit that clarity is therefore needed. If it is that the section was intended to apply to any arrest and detention under any legislation, it is recommended that the words under this Act in Section 16.2 be removed and replaced with in a zone. So that would make it clear that it would apply to any arrest and detention once it is done within the zone. It is also recommended that the section be amended to give members of the joint force express powers to arrest and detain a person in a zone where there are reasonable grounds to suspect that the person has committed, is committing, or is about to commit an offense. Our 14th proposal, Mr. Chairman, is a proposal to amend Section 16 to increase the timelines and amend the procedure where a person is arrested and detained. Now, currently under Section 16, the procedure to be followed where a person is arrested and detained is as follows. A, the person must be taken forthwith before a justice of the peace, who shall determine whether there are reasonable grounds for arrest and detention. Next, if the justice of the peace is satisfied that the arrest or detention is reasonably required in the interest of justice, he may, having regard to such further investigations as may be necessary, order that the person be remanded in custody for a period not exceeding 24 hours. If the justice of the peace is not so satisfied, he shall order that the person be released forthwith. In the event that the JP remands the person for a period not exceeding 24 hours, the person shall be taken before a judge of the parish court at the expiration of the period. We submit that the above time limits are much stricter than the time limits imposed under Section 22 of the Bail Act, which would otherwise apply in normal circumstances. Under Section 22 of the Bail Act, it provides that where a person who is arrested or detained is not charged within 24 hours as opposed to forthwith, within 24 hours under the Bail Act, he shall be brought before a parish judge or a justice of the peace who shall order his release or make such other order as the parish judge or justice of the peace thinks fit in the circumstances. Accordingly, under the normal circumstances, the police are under duty to bring a person who has been arrested without charge to a justice of the peace after the expiration of 24 hours. However, under the Instant Act, the police are under a duty to bring the person before the JP forthwith. The language is much stricter, we submit. Further, under normal circumstances, the JP is empowered to release the person or make such other order as he thinks fit in the circumstances. The power to make such other order as he thinks fit in the circumstances is wide, and no time limit is placed on the period for which the JP can order that the person be remanded. Instead, the time period is left up to his discretion. In the Instant Act, however, this discretion is removed, as the Instant Act only empowers the JP to remand the person for a period not exceeding 24 hours. We submit that the Instant Act therefore gives the security forces stricter time limits and further restrictions than otherwise provided when it comes to arrest and detention. We submit that this is contrary to the intention of the Act, as the Act is aimed at providing additional tools and powers to enable the security forces to deal with areas that are particularly rampant with high levels of crime and violence. Now, we recognize pre-charge detention as an essential tool, which not only assists the police in conducting investigations, but also assists the police in preserving law and order and saving lives. Pre-charge detention enables a suspect to be removed from the community at the investigation stage, and the benefits of this include an increase in the confidence of the community members to give information and statements to the police, reduced opportunity for reprisals and counter-reprisals, and reduced opportunity for suspects to interfere with potential witnesses. Accordingly, we are submitting that the current timeline should be increased to give the security forces more leeway and flexibility in pre-charge detention. It is, however, recognized that an increase in timeline should be accompanied by a procedure that has adequate safeguards to ensure the rights of the citizen and ensure that they are protected. In light of that, we have proposed a procedure that we are recommended to be imposed where a person is arrested or detained in a zone. The first step we propose is for the person to be taken before the member of the JSif designated in writing by the Commissioner of Police to be jointly in charge of the operations of a zone under Section 8.1. So this would be an officer who is not below the rank of superintendent. So this would be the JSif Joint Commander and is not below the rank of superintendent. We're proposing that the person be taken before that officer within 24 hours. This officer will review the circumstances of the arrest and detention to ensure that the requirement of reasonable grounds to suspect that the person has committed, is committing, or is about to commit an offense has been met. If this officer is so satisfied, we are proposing that the officer have the power to remand the person for a further 24 hours. If this officer is not so satisfied, he shall release the person forthwith. The second step is that in the event that the aforementioned officer remands the person for a further 24 hours, the person must then be taken before a JP at the expiration of this further 24-hour period. The JP shall determine whether there are reasonable grounds for the arrest and detention, and if the JP is satisfied, he can have the power to order that the person be remanded for a further period not exceeding 72 hours. If the JP is not so satisfied, he shall order that the person be released. The third stage is in the event that the JP remands the person for the further period not exceeding 72 hours, the person shall then be taken before a judge of the parish court at the expiration of the said period. It is also recommended that provision be made in the event that the 72-hour period granted by the JP expires on a weekend or public holiday where the parish court will be closed, and provide that, if this occurs, the person shall be taken before a judge of the parish court at the next court sitting. The above proposed procedure, therefore, allows for pre-charge detention for up to 5 days before the person is taken before a parish judge. It, however, we submit provides for appropriate safeguards along the stages in the form of a review of the person's arrest within 24 hours by a senior officer not below the rank of superintendent, who is the JSif member of the Joint Command for the zone, and intervention of a judicial officer in the form of a justice of the peace within 48 hours of the person's arrest. And we submit that this strikes an appropriate balance between providing the security forces with additional time and flexibility in pre-charge detention to advance investigations in the circumstances of a zone and ensuring that the citizens' rights are protected. And we are also noting that if it is accepted that the above proposals be made, a consequential amendment should also be made to Section 17(1) of the Act, where the current time period of 12 hours being amended to 48 hours, because that would be the time period now that the person has to be taken before the JP. The 15th amendment, this is a simple one. It's really to amend sections 17(1) and 18(1) to change the reference to station diary, because in this regard, the JSif, we are currently embarking on a process to digitize all station diaries, which will eventually render the station diaries obsolete, and information will now be recorded in a digitized program. So we therefore recommend that the term station diary be changed to a wider term that can incorporate these incoming changes, and we are submitting that the term appropriate records can be considered. The 16th proposal is a removal of Section 18(3). I believe this is the last proposal, yes. So a removal of Section 18(3). Section 18(2) provides that a person who is arrested and detained shall, during such times as may be determined by the prescribed officer, be allowed such visits as may be permitted, having regard to matters of security and safety of persons. Section 18(3), however, provides that notwithstanding Section 18(2), the spouse, partner, family member, religious counselor, registered medical practitioner of choice, and attorney of a person arrested and detained shall be permitted to visit the person at any time. Section 18(3) is therefore imposing an obligation on the police to allow all the listed category of persons to visit a detainee at any time, regardless of security and safety considerations. It is submitted that this section is unreasonable, impractical, and has the potential to put the security and safety of persons at risk. While we recognize that Section 14(2)(a) of the Constitution provides that a person who is arrested or detained has the right to communicate with and be visited by a spouse, partner, or family member, religious counselor, and medical practitioner of choice, we submit that this right does not extend to such visits being at any time, neither does it extend to such visits being without consideration of the security and safety of persons. It is submitted that such visits must be in a controlled manner at reasonable times and always has to take into account the security and safety of persons. And we use the current COVID-19 pandemic as an example, as it has demonstrated that a provision to have persons visit detainees at any time cannot be upheld, as several restrictions have had to be imposed on visits in order to control the spread of the virus. Restrictions on visits have also been included under several disaster management enforcement measures orders that have been made. And apart from health reasons, there are also other safety and security concerns to restrict visits in certain circumstances. We submit that it is unreasonable to expect that a person should be able to visit a detainee at any hour of the night, which is what the provision of at any time can be argued affords. Further, we submit that Section 18(2) already adequately covers the requirement for detainees to be allowed visits, while recognizing that such visits must have regard to security and safety of persons. Accordingly, in addition to Section 18(3), we submit being unreasonable and impractical. We also submit that it is unnecessary, as Section 18(2) is already sufficient. And in light of that, we recommend the removal of Section 18(3). And I've come to the end of our submissions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. White, for a very thorough presentation. Let's say that we'll take, without overextending, some questions or comments, but all of this will be put in a matrix with all of the suggestions, and at the end we look at them and decide what we accept and what we don't accept. So you'll be comparing with whatever the JDF recommend, what we will get from independently. With the last 70 anti-gang, we got the law school give a full breakdown and a number of other interested parties. So it will be documented and you'll have it to go through until you get to the end of the session and we review what is proposed and what recommendation we'll accept or reject.
Chairman, I'm not sure what time we're going to. It's after 5, so I need some guidance on that in terms of questions that may arise from their presentation. Secondly, I will recall, without going into the amendments now, and I take your point about the matrix, but I will recall a discussion in a place that Minister Samood and I sit on a Friday when this bill, when the Zozo bill. No, when we were there, we will recall the discussion. Some of these issues came up. But what I'd love, because the communities where there's likely to be Zozos are populated with poor people. And so I'd love to get from the security force, not today, but some real examples of why they need these changes. And let me take one for example. After 3 years of Zozo, how does changing 60 days to 180 days really make a difference in the crime fighting and the transformation? Because and in light of what Mr. Sweeney said today about 6 years, it's clear to me that there need to be real justification and not just a theoretical thing about making these laws. Because this legislation was a bridge between the state of emergency and the normal crime fighting. And if we want to take away more of the rights of the citizens, then somebody needs to show me that it is really, really, really necessary and the outcome we're going to get is going to be different. I've seen too many times the calls for changes in legislation. And when you give it to them, they come back and say they want more. Just take the anti-gang legislation, for example. Take the Evidence Act. You just take any of them. So I'm not minded to move these unless I can see from the practical experience on the ground that these things really is going to make a difference.
All of them will be debated for the member, and your opinion will be taken into account, and the other members here, because that's what we're here, the team, our parliamentarians. I think in this case, there was some of the rights. I think the question of bail will be one, but this was more time to practical application and reporting and so forth. But we'll discuss it. Ms. Ford, you have the experience. Yeah, not only
Permit me very quickly to put on record my commendation to the security forces, the JDF and the JSif, for the manner in which they have discharged their functions under the ZOSO. Memories can sometimes be short, but there was much apprehension when the law was proposed and it was going through its various stages. Lots of fear-mongering, understandably so. Our law books are replete with examples of excessive by the police force, but by and large, since the operationalization of the ZOSO law, the security forces have conducted themselves commendably. And in a context where we decry more than anything else, forward strides have been made, and let the record show that it is something to be celebrated, not something to become complacent about. But, all eyes were on the security forces, and we have had no substantial complaints raised about excessives. And I want to, on behalf of the government, put that on the record for commendation. Second, Secondly, I want to commend Ms. White for the comprehensive presentation on behalf of the JSif, but I want to give you a little bit of work because we get to the meat of the matter in respect of the proposals for amendment. Chairman, I will take the liberty, with your permission, to ask Council to review the recommendations through the lens of Section 13(4) of the Constitution. 13(4) specifically. All right. 13(4). She will look and see, Chairman, because we will come back to interrogate the proposals section by section. And I would also commend that it is a lens that you must use in the advice that you provide to the JSif. Very well.
Thank you. All right, it's 5:10. If we take any comment or question, be short. If not, I said.
Chairman, just clarity. Is it that on the once the matrix is done and that is circulated, that we will, in our discussions, have an opportunity to direct those questions to the JSif? Okay, just wanted to be clear on that. Thank you.
Certainly. This was fair to know. And at the end of it, I said, we will certainly have the JSif back, and in particular Ms. White, to answer questions on the various sections.
Chairman, we too support the security forces, but I am disappointed, I must say, that the report didn't get to something that I know Minister Samud has adopted. Get the guns. It didn't get a sense of, over these 3 years, how we clear the guns out as part of the clearing of the communities. I didn't get a sense from the report how we have dismantled the gangs in the communities, and I don't think that can be such an operational thing that is so sensitive that we can't get the fruit of the work of the security force being provided to us, so we can judge the success or lack thereof of the measures taken. So certainly I'd hope that we could get a sense of the guns, ammunitions removed from these communities and the gangs dismantled.
Data, the JDF gave a lot of data in terms of it.
That's a secret document that I can't
you'll have
get a chance to read.
The number of incidents said we will go through. The number of incidents, I think, was more related, because certainly the guns tend to go to another area, but there was significant data on what happened and how the gangs moved out or were detained. Significant data on that, and we'll go through that certainly. Right? AG, you say?
Chairman, I don't want to put on record the comment I just made, but going back to the agenda, just to assist you along, we will be deferring the presentation by the JDF for the next meeting, and under any other businesses to determine the time and date of the next meeting. Yes, because we do have another.
I'll keep us straight on the line and within the appropriate framework, legitimate framework. No, I think we can, we'll take the JDF on the next sitting, and we'll do it in camera first, and then decide what you want to take out. So the next meeting is scheduled for next week, the same time, and we start, and I'll ensure we start on time.
And it may be useful to still have the JCF present as well as JSif. It may be useful.
The suspect will come into almost all the sitting, but not necessarily the entire team. I think a lot of the burden will fall on Ms. White's shoulder.
I think it's the smallest of the team that you can get, because each is from one of the ZOSOs. So it may appear a large number, but it's not quite so.
Do you want to, we need to, a date, you mean when to close it? The deadline for submissions we're going to publish again, inviting submissions. What do we, today is the end of the month? What's the view of the committee members? What's the view? I have no 2 weeks. Is that the consensus? We give them 2 weeks. We send another notice and give 2 weeks for submission. All right. We adjourn until next week, 2 o'clock, and we'll take the JDF first in camera. So you can arrange that, and then we proceed. Who? CSP will come after JDF. JDF, we should be able to handle it. Yeah, just CSP. Next week we'll have the JDF first, and we'll have the CSP team after the JDF. I think we should have enough. If we start on time, we should get through on time. Right. Adjourn until next week, 2 o'clock. Thank you. Thank you, Senator. This one you keep.
Violado.